I've been given the privilege of joining the Fayetteville Public Library 2020 summer reading program to talk about steampunk. And so what I'm going to explore a definition of what steampunk is, and include the gadgets and gizmos and all the wonderful visual elements. But steampunk was born in, I believe, April of 87, when author K.W. Jeter wrote a letter to the editors of Locust Sci-Fi magazine, and in it he throws out a suggestion of a name for these steampunk fantasies, these Victorian fantasies that he and Tim Powers and Blaylock, I've misplaced Blaylock's first name, were writing. They had been, they were big fans of Victorian fiction. They were reading Oliver Twist, H.G. Wells, Charlotte Bronte, all those guys, and had been asked to pen some novels based on the style of those books. And so there was this quandary as to what to call them. And you can see here in this very short letter that Mr. Jeter wrote, he throws out the term steampunk. He actually pluralizes it, which is funny. He was I think he was just toying around, and the editor responded that he very much liked that term. So K.W. Jeter had written Morlock Nights, which is a collection of stories based on H.G. Wells' The Time Machine. And then he went on to write a trilogy about a man named George Dower, who has a very comical and eventful time with the steampunk gadgets that his father invented before his demise. And I want to share with you some of the stuff that Jeter was doing, because when I came across it, of course, you know, I read the intro, and he actually talks about how the whole corset wearing and all of that was not his idea. As a matter of fact, he in the introduction that he wrote in 2010, well, oh, that's the third book. That's why it's not in there. Infernal Devices was the first book, and in this book, in the intro, he says, if saying that one is into steampunk allows young women to attend science fiction conventions while laced into visibly complicated underwear, while their weedy boyfriends are bulked up in the heavy armor of period tweeds and vests, the inspiration is likely from the movies rather than any words on paper. So he's talking about the visual aspect of steampunk that we love wasn't something that he feels he can take credit for, even though he did launch a wonderful genre, not only of fiction but of movies and fashion. And so as I read through these books, and the prose is just amazing. A servile anxiety sounded in the captor's twin voices. They gave rise to hope that the awaited figure now approaching was their master, or in some other relationship of authority to them. Doubtless, if I could present my case to him, he would correct his underlings' mistake and have me set free, not wishing to compound whatever iniquities had been involved in the death of Fenton and the brown leather man. The vow of a gentleman to keep a discreet silence would surely be bond enough to warrant my safe passage out of their keeping. So there's this wonderful naivete to George Dower as he sets off on this 3-book adventure. But when you get to book 3, in the opening of book 3, you find, I think, a wonderful example of what Jeter is really all about. He's, well, I don't want to spoil it, so I'm not going to give much of the setting. This is just his. This is George Dower's description of the character. The man seemed born to follow behind crepe-decked hearses, skeletal fingers reverently spidered tip to toe, the caricature of his calling. This is a Scooby-Doo Undertaker. He's taking a cliche and putting it in a fine suit. And that's the sort of irony that Jeter and Blaylock and Powers really embraced. Lots of adverbs, passive voice, that wonderful old rule that you never end a sentence with a preposition, even if it takes you 6 extra words to make that sentence work in that grammatical style. So that's that text was that style of prose that they were working with was very different from the prose that publishers were generally expectant of. That the reader was supposed to be catered to. The reader was supposed to be never challenged with long sentences or long paragraphs or long words. You can have paragraphs longer than some scenes in contemporary popular fiction. So there's this kind of maybe reaction against the idea that fiction should try to compete with the speed and entertainment quality of the motion picture storytelling that had become the norm. And one thing that I think about when I think about what these writers were doing is a style okay. A style of painting, and I'm more, my background is architecture, so I'm more familiar with the architectural with the advent of mannerism in architecture. These were puns or plays on that pinnacle of art and architecture of the Renaissance. And I can imagine these architects and artists and sculptors desiring to react against the corporate and political patronage of their art. And so I'm thinking that probably Jeter has entered into this mannerist style of prose. So when we think of steampunk, we think of airships. Let's see if I can get this to work. We think of bowler hats, but not just bowler hats. We think of bowler hats with gadgets attached to them. We think of guys in waistcoats and, or I should say lads in waistcoats, and lasses in corsets. We think of lampposts, lots of lampposts, and not clocks, but chronometers. Time was, and the keeping of time and the mechanics of the keeping of time were a wonderful part of, or are a wonderful part of steampunk. And time travel, paying tribute to H.G. Wells, is one of the wonderful ways that steampunk writers dwell and delve in this system. We think of wonderful, amazing machines. These are actually at the Eiffel Tower. And so we think of again, gentlemen in waistcoats with bowler hats with accoutrements, and ladies in corsets with bowler hats and accoutrements. And we think of automatons. Automatons are a wonderful part of the steampunk world, as are mermaids. And as a matter of fact, one of the ways when I'm out at events and I've got my steampunk display behind me, and I have someone new come up to me and say, "What is steampunk?" I love to say, Steampunk is a genre in which an automaton and a mermaid can fall in love. And I'm actually working on that. I'm working on that premise. I'm between stories right now. I have a manuscript out. Readers are working on it, and I'm doing research for my next work. And so I've been putting out little segments of stories on Instagram as little images of the text about a romance between an automaton and a mermaid. I was never quite sure what to do with that story until I was out at the lake talking about. I was talking to my wife about it, and looking at the water, I suddenly realized the detriment that the mermaid's environment would have on the workings, the gears and workings of the automaton. So then I realized what the story problem was, and I jumped right into it. Okay, so I'm done with that. All right, so the beauty of steampunk is the gadgetry and their color. There's a color palette, but gadgets that are beautiful, gadgets that have lamb's tongue and acanthus leaf detailing. And the one thing that I believe is true of a lot of the people who love steampunk is that, this is a beautiful computer, but we're not looking for Dell to start producing this computer, and we don't want to go to Best Buy and buy this computer. If we want something like this, we're gonna make it ourselves. And one of the projects that I've been working on lately, I've taken this very plain white ceiling fan from Home Depot. I got it for $48. I don't know what's happened to the price there, but I've taken it, and let me see if I can locate. Not there. Here we go. Turned it into this. So, and I'm working on piecing the video together, and I'll post that on my YouTube channel very soon. I had hoped to include it in here, but it didn't come together. So here we are in, let's go back to this story in or well, let me go back to here and talk about these wonderful images. And I hope everyone would agree that steampunk is absurd. And I hope that my steampunk friends aren't as offended by the idea that steampunk is absurd as my sci-fi friends are at the idea that Star Wars is steampunk. But I mean, think about the lightsaber of we were accustomed to laser guns from all of the sci-fi genre stories on television and in the movies. And here comes George Lucas. We went to the theaters in '77. We sat down, and those three words appeared on the screen long, long ago, and that just blew our minds, because sci-fi is about the future. It's about this wonderful hope of what technology is going to do. And here we have this past that we're being presented, and it's a past of swords that are, as Obi-Wan said, um, an elegant weapon for a more civilized age. There were so many things about the movie that were retro. In '77, if we do a look at the images of 1977, cars were, see if I can find, cars were the lines were straight, and edges were crisp, and Luke's speeder looks like something from the 50s or maybe the 60s. So we have in the 70s, after Vietnam, and after decades of the Cold War, and the species, when war had become not just one nation trying to defeat another, but the species actually threatening to attack itself, to destroy itself. So in '77, we get this amazing sci-fi story from the past with I mean, even Han Solo's get up would fit right into a steampunk convention. And then the next year we get Superman, which I guess could be, I mean, it's a superhero, but there were definitely sci-fi. There were definitely sci-fi aspects to it. And the whole premise of that was that Lex Luthor was going to completely destroy the West Coast to increase, using weapons of mass destruction, to increase these property values, the values of properties that he had bought. So what's going on in pop culture is that after Vietnam and all the political crises, we have this movement appear called punk. And so, I mean, when Jeter presented the idea that we call this Victorian mannerist prose steampunk, I'm curious about his attitude toward punk culture, because there are a lot of similarities between punk culture and steampunk. And one of the things, if I can find it here, one of the general ideas is that if you're not angry, you're not paying attention. and it's all about here. This against the idea of buying your styles off the shelf, making your own style, being unique, and out of this, another genre of fiction had come out called cyberpunk. Now, cyberpunk is dystopian futurism, and we usually think of sci-fi. We usually think of cyberpunk and dystopian, most of the dystopian stories, as being subgenres of sci-fi. But I'm going to say that actually dystopian fiction, when it unless it is void of any technology whatsoever, which is rare, dystopian fiction is actually the opposite of sci-fi, because in sci-fi you have your you've got all of your technology doing wonderful things to help your protagonist. Aboard the Enterprise, they had warp drive, and they had the teleporters and that amazing universal translator. And so if you just visualize for a moment those beautiful images of the USS Enterprise with its that spherical disc up front, and then you jump in your mind to that moment when we've been through District 12, we've seen the grunge and the grime and the terrible living conditions, and we go out in the woods with Katniss and Gale, and this hovercraft appears, and we realize suddenly that there's amazing technology in this world, but Katniss doesn't have it. District 12 doesn't have it. They're digging around in coal mines like they would have in the 1900s. So Panem as a whole has this amazing technology. The capital has it under control, and that to me is the opposite of sci-fi. In any dystopian story, whether it's set in an age of sticks and rocks or of hovercrafts and laser guns, the holders of the technology are using it to suppress the main character. So when Jeter is proposing his name, he doesn't choose Vic Lit or Gear Lit or even Steam Lit. He puts that punk on the end of there. And so what I would suggest is that if sci-fi is the hope of a wonderful world, a wonderful tomorrow with technology taking care of us and fixing everything for us, and dystopia is the fear of a tomorrow in which technology has put us into a terrible state. Steampunk is this perpendicular to both of those ideas, that just wants to embrace technology in its infancy, when it was still when it still offered hope and a glorious tomorrow. So as we progress into the details of steampunk, you can look at the alternate history versus the alternate future, and an example of alternate future is the amazing quartet that Philip Reeve wrote that begins with Mortal Engines, and it's set in both a post-apocalypse and a steampunk world, which was a big inspiration for me in the 4-book series that I wrote. But I think the things that we think of when we think of steampunk are the alternate history, like steam-powered ray guns and time machines that are run off of steam engines, and those wonderful airships that gave us so much promise at the beginning, at the end of the 19th century. So that's the argument that's what I love to think of when I think of steampunk, not Vic Lit or Gear Lit, but steampunk is this this protest, just like punk culture is, but in a very gentlemanly way. So I can stop here and take any questions if we have any, or I've got a brief video that shows my my 4-book series that I have. I've got a couple of images that are mock-ups for the pure alt history steampunk story that I've just finished and I'm editing now. So I think I'm going to go ahead and play the trailer for those books. Okay, so that's the Tritico Quartet. Let me just get something to pop up there. Okay. So if we don't have any questions,
You said earlier mermaids would pop up in steampunk. Why mermaids, do you think?
there's a lot of supernatural and mystical concepts in steampunk. The Kraken, I mean, they were in the 19th century, they were steam powering their ships for the first time. The country with the biggest navy was the most powerful, and the things beneath the sea were really, really popular. And the idea of the merfolk being down there under all those wonderful old ships, and the threat of the Kraken attacking, those are really common in the both the steampunk short stories from like the collection Steampunk, and I mean, even like the spiritualism of the 19th century is a popular theme with ghosts. I mean, it's this amazingly diverse genre, because you can have these wonderful technologies side by side with mythical creatures. There's a series that is all about the fairy folk and their experiences with the humans, and it's wonderful steampunk. The colors and textures and everything is just beautiful in it.
And what other authors? I mean, everybody always recognizes H.G. Wells elements anytime you talk about steampunk, but what other authors besides H.G. Wells were inspirations for this genre, do you think? Just your opinion.
Well, Jules, for the technology aspect of it, Jules Verne was a big contributor. As a matter of fact, I noticed there's an image. I know I have it somewhere here in my Instagram saves of his balloon, and one of the there was there's a 3D modeler. This is some of his art, and this is his rendition of the craft that Jules Verne that would have done the around the world in 80 days. And the balloon was a wonderful new invention of the 19th century, and traveling in it is air travel was a big goal of the 19th century. And so, yeah, Jules Verne, but I mean, the people, like, they were reading Jack Shepherd by when I say they, I mean Jeter, Blaylock, and Powers. They were reading Bronte and Austen, and that's where I think that's where it really got its punkishness, is pulling in that very very out of date prose from Dickens and Ainsworth and some of the other 19th century writers.
All right, thank you so much. And
Thank you.
we're going to be over and out. Author Tim Cook, author of the what is the full title of your steampunk quartet?
It's the Trentico Quartet.
Trentico Quartet. All right, thank you so much. See you later.
Thank you.